Alien Empress returned from council and couldn't believe what her human janitor was teaching her son. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The imperial palace of Zentera gleamed like a jewel against the violet sky, its crystalline spires reflecting the light of 3 moons. Within its walls, Empress Shalara, ruler of the 7-star systems, had left her most precious treasure, her only son and heir, while she attended the Galactic Council. The Zenteran Palace guards stood at attention as the royal shuttle descended onto the landing platform. Steam hissed from the craft's vents as it settled on the crystalline surface. The doors slid open with a soft pneumatic sigh, and Empress Shalara emerged, her regal posture betraying nothing of the exhaustion that plagued her after 3 weeks of tense negotiations. "Welcome home, your luminescence," said Commander Threll, bowing deeply. His exoskeleton gleamed in the moonlight as he straightened. "The palace has been maintained in perfect order during your absence. I trust my son as well," Shalara asked, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of concern among her species. "Prince Kelmar is in excellent health, your luminescence," Threll replied, though his secondary mandibles twitched slightly, a subtle tell that something was amiss. Shalara's antennae stiffened. "What aren't you telling me, Commander?" Threll hesitated, his compound eyes shifting nervously. "The young prince has been spending time with the human maintenance worker. More than is perhaps appropriate." "The human?" Shalara's inner eyelids narrowed. "The one we acquired after the Treaty of Earth? I specifically assigned him to the maintenance levels. He should have no contact with my son." "Yes, your luminescence. However, Prince Kelmar has been seeking out the human's company." Shalara's crystalline crown glinted dangerously as she tilted her head. "Take me to my son, now." As they glided through the palace corridors, Shalara reflected on how the humans had entered her life. Earth had been on the brink of destruction, their atmosphere poisoned, their resources depleted. The Zentran Empire had offered salvation in exchange for service. Many humans had accepted, becoming workers throughout the empire. Most Zenterans viewed them as primitive but useful, like well-trained pets. The human assigned to her palace, Ethan Cole, had been quiet and diligent. Shalara had barely noticed him during the 6 standard cycles he had served in the palace. He performed his tasks efficiently and without complaint, which was all she required. She had never considered him a threat. Until now. "The prince is in the South Garden, your luminescence," Threll said as they approached a crystalline archway. With the human, Shalara moved silently through the arch, her regal robes barely whispering against the polished floor. The garden spread before her, a carefully cultivated collection of specimens from across the empire. And there, beneath the spreading branches of a bioluminescent tree from her homeworld, was her son. Prince Kelmar, barely into his 5th molt and still showing the blue iridescence of youth, was laughing. Not the formal, restrained expression of amusement appropriate for a royal offspring, but genuine, uninhibited laughter that made his exoskeleton vibrate. And beside him, sitting cross-legged on the garden floor, was the human. Ethan Cole didn't look threatening. His soft, fur-less skin and rounded features made him appear almost childlike compared to the sleek, armored bodies of the Zenterans. He was demonstrating something to the young prince, his hands moving in quick, precise motions. "And that's how you make a paper airplane," the human was saying, holding up a folded piece of thin material. "Now you try." Prince Kelmar, heir to the 7-star systems, was hunched over in concentration, his delicate royal digits awkwardly folding a piece of paper. His face, usually a mask of regal composure even at his young age, was scrunched in determination. "Like this, Ethan?" the prince asked, holding up a crumpled approximation of what the human had created. "Almost, buddy," the human said with an encouraging smile. "Here, let me show you one more time." "Buddy?" The familiar term of address made Shalara's blood run cold. This was far worse than she had imagined. The human was addressing her son as an equal, even using a diminutive term of endearment. And her son was responding to it. "That will not be necessary," Shalara said, her voice cutting through the garden's tranquility like a blade. Both figures turned toward her, with vastly different reactions. The human immediately scrambled to his feet, dropping the paper creation and bowing deeply. Your luminescence. Welcome back. Prince Kelmar's reaction was more concerning. Rather than expressing joy at her return, her son quickly tried to hide the paper construction behind his back, his expression guilty. Mother, I didn't know you were returning today. Clearly, Shalara said coldly. She glided forward, her gaze fixed on the human. You are dismissed, maintenance worker. Return to your assigned duties. The human bowed again. Yes, your luminescence. But before turning to leave, he glanced at the prince. Good job today, Prince Kelmar. Remember what we talked about. The look that passed between them, conspiratorial, warm, familiar, sent a spike of alarm through Shalara's core. What had this human been teaching her son during her absence? After the human departed, Shalara turned to her son. Explain yourself, Kelmar. Why are you consorting with a servant? And a human, at that? Kelmar's antennae drooped slightly. Ethan isn't just a servant, mother. He's my friend. He teaches me things that Tutor Vazril never would, such as making primitive paper toys. Shalara asked, her tone dripping with disdain. That was just today, Kelmar said, his young voice gaining confidence. He's taught me about Earth cultures, human games, their history, all irrelevant to your future role as Emperor, Shalara interrupted. Your education is carefully planned to prepare you for ruling the 7 systems. Human folktales and paper toys have no place in it. But mother, enough, Shalara said firmly. You will not see this human again except in his capacity as a maintenance worker. I will instruct Commander Threll to ensure he remains in the lower levels where he belongs. For a moment, Shalara thought her son might argue further, a concept so foreign it momentarily stunned her. Zintaran children, especially royal ones, simply did not contradict their elders. But something in Kelmar's posture changed. He straightened, his 4 eyes meeting hers directly. As you wish, mother, he said, his voice carefully neutral. May I be excused to prepare for evening meal? Shalara nodded, watching as her son walked away, his usually fluid movements stiff with suppressed emotion. This was deeply troubling. In just 3 weeks, this human had somehow influenced her son enough to change his behavior. What else had changed? Commander Threll, she called, knowing the officer waited just outside the garden. Yes, your luminescence? Threll appeared instantly. Have the human maintenance worker brought to my private audience chamber. Immediately. Yes, your luminescence. Threll hesitated. Shall I inform the High Council that you wish to discipline him? Shalara considered this. Official discipline would require documentation, witnesses, and justification. She wasn't ready for that yet. No, this is a private matter. I merely wish to speak with him. 20 minutes later, Ethan Cole stood before her in her private audience chamber, a room of sweeping crystalline arches and subtle bioluminescent lighting. Without her full regalia and attendants, the room should have made her appear less imposing. Yet the human showed no sign of intimidation as he waited for her to speak. You have overstepped your boundaries, human, Shalara began, her voice cold. You were assigned to maintenance duties, not to interact with the royal heir. Ethan met her gaze steadily. With all due respect, your luminescence, Prince Kelmar sought me out. I didn't approach him. You could have reported his presence and returned him to his tutors. I could have, Ethan agreed. But he was lonely. And curious. Lonely, Shalara repeated, genuinely confused. He has 12 royal companions assigned to him, selected from the finest families in the Empire. 12 peers who are as carefully scripted and controlled as he is, Ethan said. They aren't friends, your luminescence. They're extensions of his education. Shalara rose from her seat, her full height towering over the human. You presume to critique the royal education system? A system refined over thousands of cycles. I'm simply telling you what your son told me, Ethan said, standing his ground. He's bright, curious, and hungry for knowledge that goes beyond the approved curriculum. And you believe folding paper into primitive flying devices constitutes valuable knowledge. A small smile touched Ethan's lips. It teaches spatial reasoning, patience, and the principles of aerodynamics. But more importantly, it teaches him to use his hands to create something from nothing. Your education system focuses on theory and protocol, not practical application. Shalara's antennae vibrated with irritation. You know nothing of our education system. I know it's creating a prince who can recite the lineage of every royal family for 12 generations, but doesn't know how to tie his own ceremonial sash, Ethan countered. A prince who can calculate stellar drift patterns, but has never felt the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. These are servant tasks, Shalara said dismissively. An emperor commands. He does not build. On Earth, our greatest leaders understood the work of those they led, Ethan said. How can Kelmar effectively rule people whose lives he doesn't comprehend? Shalara stared at the human, torn between outrage at his impertinence and a reluctant curiosity. What exactly have you been teaching my son, beyond paper folding? Earth history, problem-solving games, music, stories from different human cultures. Ethan paused, then added, and I've been listening to him. Something his tutors and companions rarely do. Listening to what? His ideas, his questions, his fears about becoming emperor someday. Ethan's expression softened. He's worried he'll disappoint you, that he won't be as strong a ruler as you are. This caught Shalara off guard. Zintran royal children were raised to view their ascension as inevitable and natural, not something to fear. Had her son really been harboring such concerns? Why would he confide such things in you, a human servant, rather than his designated counselors? She asked, genuinely puzzled. Because I have no agenda, Ethan said simply. I don't benefit from his favor or suffer from his displeasure. I'm just a friend. The concept was so alien to Shalara that she found herself momentarily speechless. In Zintran society, particularly royal circles, every relationship was defined by duty, protocol, and mutual benefit. The idea of friendship for its own sake, with someone of vastly different status, was nearly incomprehensible. I believe I understand the situation now, Shalara said finally. You have taken advantage of a young prince's natural curiosity to elevate your position. Perhaps you hope to gain favor, privileges, even power through this relationship. Ethan sighed, seeming more disappointed than offended. That's not it at all, your luminescence. But I understand why you might think that way. You will be reassigned, Shalara decided. There's a mining operation in the Kaldar system that requires human workers. You'll depart tomorrow. For the first time, she saw fear flicker across the human's face. The mining operations were notorious for their harsh conditions and high mortality rates among workers. Before you make that decision, Ethan said carefully, I'd like to ask one favor. You are in no position to ask favors, human. Not for me, he clarified. For Prince Kelmar. Let him show you what he's learned. Judge for yourself whether my influence has been harmful before you send me away. Shalara considered the request. It would be simpler to dismiss the human immediately. Yet something, curiosity perhaps, or the mention of her son's fears, made her hesitate. Very well, she said finally. One demonstration. Tomorrow morning, in the small audience chamber. After that, you will be reassigned regardless of what I observe. Thank you, your luminescence, Ethan said, bowing deeply. As guards escorted him out, Shalara sank back into her seat, troubled by the encounter. The human was different from what she had expected, articulate, confident, and seemingly genuine in his concern for her son. It was unsettling. Later that evening, she visited Kelmar in his chambers. Her son was sitting at his study terminal, dutiful as always, but she noticed he quickly switched screens as she entered. What were you viewing? She asked. Kelmar hesitated, then sighed. Earth music. Ethan introduced me to it. Rather than scolding him, Shalara found herself asking, May I hear it? Surprised, Kelmar nodded and restored the screen. A strange sequence of sounds filled the room, rhythmic, using instruments Shalara had never heard before. It was primitive compared to the mathematical precision of Zintran harmonics, yet there was something compelling about its raw energy. This is called jazz, Kelmar explained, his eyes brightening with enthusiasm. Ethan says it's special because the musicians improvise. They make it up as they play, following feeling rather than a written composition. Improvisation in music was a foreign concept to Zentrans. Their compositions were meticulously planned, each note calculated for perfect mathematical harmony. And you find this appealing? Shalara asked. It's alive, Kelmar said, struggling to explain. Zentran music is beautiful, but it's the same every time. This changes with each performance. Ethan says that's what makes humans special, their ability to adapt and create something new from chaos. Shalara listened silently, hearing not just the strange music but the passion in her son's voice. This wasn't merely a child's passing interest. Kelmar was genuinely captivated by these human concepts. I've arranged for you to show me what else you've learned from the human tomorrow, she said finally. He claimed you've gained valuable knowledge from him. Kelmar's eyes widened. Really? You want to see? I want to understand what has captured your interest so thoroughly, Shalara replied carefully. This human will be reassigned after tomorrow, but before he goes, I wish to evaluate his influence on you. Instead of protesting the reassignment, Kelmar nodded solemnly. I'll prepare a demonstration. You'll see. Mother, Ethan has taught me important things. Things that will make me a better emperor someday. His confidence surprised her. Perhaps there was more to this situation than she had initially assumed. The following morning, Shalara entered the small audience chamber to find it rearranged. Instead of the formal seating designed for royal audiences, there was a single table in the center with items arranged on its surface that she didn't recognize. Kelmar and the human were already there, heads bent together as they made final adjustments to whatever they had prepared. They straightened as she entered, both bowing. Your luminescence, Ethan said formally. Prince Kelmar has prepared a demonstration of some concepts we've been exploring together. Shalara took her seat, noting with interest that her son appeared nervous but determined. Proceed. Kelmar stepped forward. Mother, the first thing Ethan taught me was that learning isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about understanding principles and applying them in new ways. He gestured to the table, where several contraptions were arranged. These are what humans call simple machines. They're the building blocks of all technology. He picked up a lever arrangement. This demonstrates mechanical advantage, how a small force can move a large weight when properly applied. For the next 20 minutes, Shalara watched in growing amazement as her son explained and demonstrated principles of physics, engineering, and problem-solving, all using materials that appeared to be repurposed from common items around the palace. He wasn't simply reciting information. He was showing genuine understanding, making connections between concepts, even pointing out how some of these principles were used in Zentran technology without most Zentrans understanding the underlying mechanics. And this, Kelmar said, coming to his final demonstration, is something Ethan calls design thinking. It's a human approach to solving problems. He presented a model of the palace water distribution system, a system that had been experiencing inefficiencies for years. Using his simple model, Kelmar demonstrated a reconfiguration that would reduce waste by nearly 30%. I analyzed the existing system and found that the problem isn't in the main distribution network, as our engineers believed, Kelmar explained, his voice gaining confidence. It's in how the flow is balanced between levels. This adjustment would save resources and improve performance. Shalara stared at the model, then at her son. This was not the work of a child merely playing at understanding. This was genuine problem-solving ability, applied to a real issue within her palace. Have you verified these calculations? She asked the human. Ethan nodded. I helped with some of the math, but the observation and solution are entirely Prince Kelmar's. He has a natural talent for seeing systems holistically, not just their component parts. Shalara turned her attention back to her son. What else has the human taught you, Kelmar? Kelmar glanced at Ethan, who gave him an encouraging nod. He's taught me about Earth history, how humans nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, but always found a way to adapt and survive. He's taught me about their art, their music, their stories. He paused, then added, but mostly he's taught me to ask why and what if. Explain, Shalara commanded. Our education system teaches us what is, Kelmar said carefully. But humans constantly ask why things are that way. And what if they could be different? That's how they advance so quickly, even without our technology or lifespan. They question everything. Shalara considered this. Zintaran society valued stability and tradition. Change came slowly, carefully managed. The idea of constantly questioning established systems was almost revolutionary and potentially dangerous. Yet there was wisdom in her son's words. The Zintaran Empire had grown complacent in recent centuries, their technological advancement slowing as they focused on maintaining what they had already built. Meanwhile, younger species like humans had developed at a remarkable pace, despite their limited resources. She turned to the human. "This is what you've been teaching my son? To question our ways." "I've been teaching him to think critically," Ethan corrected gently. "To understand that even the most perfect system can be improved. To see possibilities where others see only what already exists." "And you believe this will make him a better emperor?" Shalara asked, genuinely curious now. "I believe it will make him a better person," Ethan replied. "And yes, a better leader. The galaxy is changing, your luminescence. The old ways of ruling through tradition and force alone won't be enough in the future." Shalara was silent for a long moment, her four eyes moving between her son and the human. She had come expecting to confirm her decision to remove this influence from Kelmar's life. Instead, she found herself questioning her own assumptions. The water distribution solution alone would save resources equivalent to operating a small city for a year, she said finally. "That is not insignificant." "It's just the beginning," Kelmar said eagerly. "Ethan has been helping me identify other systems that could be improved, not just in the palace, but throughout the empire." Shalara rose, her decision made. The human will not be sent to the mining operation. Both Kelmar and Ethan brightened visibly. "However," she continued, "neither will he return to maintenance duties. If these lessons are as valuable as they appear, they should be formalized." She turned to Ethan. "You will be reassigned as a special advisor on human innovation and problem-solving methodologies. You will continue to work with Prince Kelmar, but under proper supervision and with a structured curriculum that I will review." Ethan bowed deeply. "Thank you, your luminescence. I'm honored. Do not mistake this for complete approval," Shalara warned. "I remain skeptical of many human philosophies, but I cannot deny results." She looked at her son. "Kelmar has shown more initiative and practical understanding today than in many formal evaluations." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One question, human. Why did you take such an interest in teaching my son? What did you hope to gain?" Ethan smiled slightly. "On Earth, we have a saying, knowledge is meant to be shared. When Prince Kelmar first approached me with questions, I saw a bright mind eager to learn. Teaching him has been its own reward." Shalara studied him, searching for deception but finding none. "A curious philosophy. We shall see if it produces an emperor worthy of the seven systems." As she left the chamber, she heard her son's excited voice asking the human about the next project they might tackle together. For the first time in many cycles, Shalara felt a sensation she rarely experienced, uncertainty. Had she made the right decision? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Her son was changing, growing in ways the traditional Zintaran education had not fostered. And perhaps, though she would never admit it aloud, the empire itself might benefit from a bit of human questioning. 2 standard months had passed since Empress Shalara had reassigned the human from maintenance duties to special advisor. The palace had been abuzz with gossip about the unprecedented appointment, but Shalara had ignored the murmurs. Results were what mattered, and the results were undeniable. Prince Kelmar's academic performance had improved dramatically, not just in subjects like engineering and practical physics, where the human's influence was direct, but across all areas of study. His tutors reported increased engagement, deeper questions, and a newfound enthusiasm for learning. More surprising were the changes Shalara observed in her son's demeanor. The formal, sometimes stilted young prince was developing confidence and a quiet charisma that reminded her of his father. Kelmar was becoming someone who could not just command respect through rank, but earn it through presence. Today, however, Shalara faced a diplomatic crisis that pushed thoughts of her son's education aside. She sat in her war room, surrounded by her highest advisors, reviewing a holographic display of the Dravex border conflict. The Dravex fleet has established a blockade around Naranthi, your luminescence, General Kovar reported, his exoskeleton clicking nervously. They claim the moon's resources were promised to them in the Treaty of Kaldar, which is blatantly false, High Minister Zell added, her voice sharp with indignation. The treaty explicitly recognizes Zintaran's sovereignty over all moons in the Naranthi system. Shalara studied the holographic representation of the blockade. 15 Dravex warships positioned around Naranthi's orbit, preventing access to the moon's valuable mineral deposits. The Dravex were a prideful species, quick to aggression and slow to diplomacy. This was a deliberate provocation, one that demanded response. "What are our options?" she asked. "We can deploy the Third Fleet," General Kovar suggested immediately. A show of force might convince the Dravex to withdraw without actual conflict. And if it doesn't? Shalara pressed. The Dravex rarely respond to mere shows of force. Then we would have no choice but to engage, Kovar admitted. Our technology is superior, but the Dravex have numbers. Casualties would be significant on both sides. High Minister Zell cleared her throat. We could appeal to the Galactic Council for mediation, which would take weeks, possibly months, Minister of Resources Thax countered. Meanwhile, our mining operations on Naranthi remain suspended, costing the Empire billions in lost resources. There is another option, a new voice said from the doorway. All heads turned to see Prince Kelmar standing there, with the human advisor Ethan Cole a respectful step behind him. This is a closed council, Prince Kelmar, General Kovar said stiffly. Military matters are not yet part of your education. Shalara studied her son. Normally, such a rebuke would have sent him retreating with apologies. But today, Kelmar stood his ground. I believe I have information relevant to this crisis, he said, his young voice steady. Information that could resolve the conflict without bloodshed or appeal to the council. Silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to Shalara. It was her decision whether to allow this interruption to continue. Speak, then, she said finally. But be brief. This matter is urgent. Kelmar approached the holographic display. The Dravex claim is based on a specific interpretation of the mineral rights section of the Treaty of Kaldar. They believe the phrase celestial bodies within the Naranthi system excludes moons. A deliberate misinterpretation, Minister Zell scoffed. Yes, Kelmar agreed, but one that gives them a pretext for this action. However, there's something they don't know. He glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. The Dravex culture places enormous value on primogeniture, the rights of the firstborn. It's deeply embedded in their society, almost religious in nature. This is known, General Kovar said impatiently. What of it? During my studies with Ethan, we've been analyzing historical records from various species, Kelmar explained. We discovered something interesting about Naranthi's formation. He manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on the moon. Naranthi wasn't always a moon of the planet Zenith. It was originally a planetoid that was captured by Zenith's gravity approximately 2 million years ago. Shalara's antennae stiffened with interest. You're suggesting that Naranthi existed as an independent celestial body before becoming a moon? Exactly, Kelmar said, his eyes bright with excitement. By Dravex cultural standards, Naranthi has firstborn rights as an independent body. Their own cultural beliefs would obligate them to recognize it as falling under the treaty's protection. The war room was silent as the advisors processed this information. How certain are you of this astronomical history? Shalara asked. The evidence is in our own scientific archives, Kelmar said. Gravitational studies from 300 cycles ago confirmed Naranthi's capture orbit. We simply never had reason to emphasize this aspect of its formation before. Shalara turned to Science Minister Vex. Verify this immediately. 10 tense minutes passed as Vex accessed the Imperial archives. Finally, she looked up. The prince is correct. your luminescence. Our astronomical records confirm that Naranthe was an independent planetoid before being captured by Zenith's gravity well. This is fascinating astronomical trivia, General Kovar said. But will the Dravex care about such details when their warships are in position? They will if it's presented correctly. Ethan spoke for the first time, drawing surprised looks from the council members. The Dravex value saving face above all else. If we publicly announce this finding as a new discovery, one that, by their own cultural standards, invalidates their claim, they can withdraw while claiming they're respecting new scientific evidence, not backing down from Zentran pressure. Shalara considered this approach. It was unusual, far from the standard diplomatic or military responses the Empire typically employed. Yet it had a certain elegant logic. Prepare a formal communication to the Dravex High Command, she decided. Include all scientific evidence regarding Naranthe's origin. Frame it as a recent archaeological discovery that we are sharing out of respect for Dravex cultural values. As the council members moved to implement her orders, Shalara beckoned to Kelmar and the human. "Wait behind," she commanded. When the room had emptied except for the three of them, Shalara fixed her gaze on her son. "Explain how you came to study this particular aspect of astronomical history." Kelmar straightened. "After you approved my continued lessons with Ethan, we began studying comparative cultural values across species. When I heard about the Dravex blockade from Palace Communications, which you accessed without authorization," Shalara interrupted. Kelmar had the grace to look abashed. "Yes, Mother. I apologize for that breach of protocol. But once I understood the situation, I recalled our studies on Dravex culture. Ethan suggested we look for connections between their claims and any scientific facts that might influence their position. It was a theoretical exercise," Ethan added quickly, "a way to apply cultural understanding to real diplomatic situations. We didn't intend to intrude on imperial business." Shalara studied them both for a long moment. "You accessed restricted information, conducted unauthorized research into a sensitive diplomatic crisis, and then interrupted a high council meeting to present your findings." Both Kelmar and the human remained silent, accepting the rebuke. "And in doing so," Shalara continued, her tone shifting subtly, "you may have saved thousands of lives and prevented a costly military engagement." She settled back in her chair. "I find myself in the unusual position of not knowing whether to punish or commend you. If I may, your luminescence," Ethan said carefully. "On Earth, we would say the ends don't justify the means, but they might mitigate the consequences." A small trill of amusement escaped Shalara, a sound rarely heard in the war room. A diplomatic answer worthy of a Zentran courtier. She focused on her son. "Tell me truthfully, Kelmar, did you consider the protocol breach when you decided to bring this information forward?" Kelmar hesitated, then nodded. "I did, Mother. But I also considered what you've always taught me, that an emperor's first duty is to preserve the lives of imperial citizens. I calculated that the protocol breach was worth the potential benefit." "Calculated," Shalara repeated, the word resonating strangely. Her son had weighed consequences, evaluated risks, and made a decision based on larger principles rather than mere rules. It was exactly the kind of thinking an emperor needed, and exactly the kind of thinking that traditional Zentran education rarely fostered. "You will both report to Minister Zell tomorrow," she said finally. "She will instruct you on proper diplomatic channels for presenting such information in the future. You will learn the protocols that exist for a reason." Both heads bowed in acknowledgement. "And," Shalara added, "you will continue your studies of comparative cultural values. It seems there may be practical applications I had not previously considered." 3 days later, Shalara stood on her private balcony overlooking the capital city, watching the 3 moons rise over the crystalline spires. Behind her, a discreet chime announced a visitor. "Enter," she commanded. High Minister Zell glided into the room, bowing deeply. "The Dravex have responded, your luminescence." Shalara turned. "Their decision? They are withdrawing their fleet, effective immediately," Zell reported, unable to keep a note of amazement from her voice. "They cite New astronomical evidence that clarifies the status of Naranthi under the sacred laws of primogeniture. No demands. No concessions requested. None. Your luminescence. They've even proposed a joint scientific expedition to study Naranthi's formation in greater detail. Zell hesitated. It's an unprecedented diplomatic victory. The expected course of action would have cost thousands of lives and billions in resources. Shalara turned back to the view of her city, a city that would not now be sending its youth to fight and die in space. Sometimes the expected course is not the optimal one, it seems. Indeed, your luminescence. Zell paused, then added carefully. The council is curious about how Prince Kelmar came to make this connection. It shows remarkable insight for one so young. Shalara considered her answer. The truth, that a human maintenance worker turned advisor had helped her son see connections between astronomy and alien cultural values, would be difficult for many in her court to accept. My son has been pursuing a more interdisciplinary course of study recently, she said finally. It appears to be yielding results. After Zell departed, Shalara remained on the balcony, her thoughts troubled despite the diplomatic victory. The human's influence on her son was proving more significant than she had anticipated. Kelmar was developing an innovative way of thinking that was distinctly un-Zentran, seeing connections across disciplines, questioning established protocols, finding creative solutions where traditional approaches failed. Was this a benefit or a threat to the Empire's future? Would her son become an emperor who transformed the Zentran Empire, or one who undermined its foundational principles? She needed to understand better what was happening in these lessons. The following morning, instead of attending the council meeting as scheduled, Shalara made her way to the small study room, where Kelmar and the human conducted their sessions. Rather than announcing her presence, she activated the room's observation mode, a security feature that allowed her to watch and listen without being detected. Inside, Kelmar and Ethan were engaged in what appeared to be a game. A holographic display showed various colored pieces moving across multiple levels. Remember, Ethan was saying, the goal isn't to capture all the opponent's pieces. Sometimes sacrificing your own pieces achieves a better strategic position. But won't I be weaker with fewer resources? Kelmar asked, studying the board intently. Not if the remaining resources are in the right position, Ethan explained. This is the difference between linear and systems thinking. Linear thinking says more pieces always equals more power. Systems thinking looks at how the pieces interact and what functions they serve in the larger context. Kelmar nodded slowly, then moved one of his pieces into a position that appeared vulnerable. Like this? I'm sacrificing this piece, but it forces their defense to shift. Exactly, Ethan smiled. You're creating an opportunity through apparent weakness. It's a strategy humans have used throughout our history, despite being technologically or numerically disadvantaged. Shalara watched as the game progressed, noting how Kelmar's initial sacrifice had indeed created an opportunity he later exploited to win. It was a sophisticated strategy, one that went against Zentran military doctrine, which emphasized overwhelming force and resource superiority. The game concluded, and Ethan shifted focus. Now, let's continue our discussion on adaptive governance. Last time, we were discussing how different Earth societies handled resource distribution during scarcity. For the next hour, Shalara listened as they explored human history, periods of famine, plague, war, and environmental disaster, analyzing how different governance approaches succeeded or failed. The human didn't simply lecture. He asked questions, challenged Kelmar's assumptions, and encouraged him to consider multiple perspectives. But if the resources were limited, Kelmar was saying, wouldn't the logical approach be to preserve the ruling class and most essential workers? That's the Zentran emergency protocol. Some human societies tried that approach, Ethan acknowledged. But it often led to revolution when the excluded groups felt they had nothing to lose. Other societies tried more equitable distribution, even at the cost of luxury for the elite. And those societies survived better? Kelmar asked. Not always in the short term, Ethan admitted. But in the long term, they often developed greater cohesion and innovation. When people at all levels feel invested in a society's success, they contribute more to solving its problems. Kelmar's antennae twitched thoughtfully. The Zinteran approach values stability above all. Change is seen as inherently risky. Stability is valuable, Ethan agreed. But so is adaptability. The most successful systems find a balance between preserving what works and adapting to new challenges. Shalara had heard enough. She deactivated the observation mode and made her way back to her chambers, her mind working through the implications of what she'd witnessed. The human wasn't simply teaching her son Earth trivia or technical skills. He was presenting alternative frameworks for governance, resource allocation, and strategic thinking, frameworks that sometimes contradicted fundamental Zinteran principles. Yet she couldn't deny the effectiveness of these approaches. The Dravex crisis had been resolved peacefully through an application of this cross-cultural, systems-oriented thinking. What other benefits might come from such methods? That evening, Shalara summoned both Kelmar and Ethan to her private chambers, a rare honor that signified the importance of the conversation to come. "I observed your lesson today," she announced without preamble once they had arrived. Ethan tensed slightly, but maintained his composure. "I hope you found it educational, your luminescence." "I found it concerning," Shalara replied. "You are teaching my son concepts that challenge the foundation of Zinteran governance." Kelmar stepped forward. "Mother, Ethan isn't trying to undermine our ways. He's showing me alternatives, different approaches that might complement our own." "Is that how you see it, human?" Shalara asked, focusing her 4 eyes on Ethan. "It is, your luminescence," Ethan replied. "The Zinteran Empire has thrived for millennia using your traditional approaches. I wouldn't presume to suggest replacing them, but even the most successful system can benefit from new perspectives." "And what do you gain from providing these new perspectives?" Shalara pressed. "You must have some motive beyond the satisfaction of teaching." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. When humans first encountered the Zinteran Empire, many of us feared extinction. Earth was dying, and your people offered salvation in exchange for service. It was a fair arrangement, but not an equal one. "Naturally," Shalara said, "our civilization is far more advanced. In technology, lifespan, and territory, yes," Ethan acknowledged. "But human history has given us certain insights your people haven't needed to develop. We've survived countless self-inflicted disasters, adapting and innovating out of necessity. That experience has value. And by teaching my son, you hope to increase the perceived value of humans within the Empire," Shalara concluded. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I hope to create understanding. Humans aren't just laborers to be utilized. We're partners with unique contributions to offer. Prince Kelmar will someday rule an empire that includes humans. I want him to see us as assets, not just subjects." Shalara turned to her son. "And what do you think of this human perspective, Kelmar?" The young prince straightened, his exoskeleton gleaming in the chamber's soft light. "I think it makes me stronger, Mother. I'm learning to see problems from multiple angles, to question assumptions without rejecting tradition outright. The Dravex crisis showed how valuable that can be." Shalara moved to the window, looking out at the capital city spread below, a civilization built on order, hierarchy, and carefully managed change. For millennia, the Zinteran Empire had expanded through superior technology and disciplined implementation of proven strategies. But the galaxy was evolving. Younger species like the humans were rising quickly, bringing different approaches and perspectives. "The traditional path to the throne," she said finally, "would have you spend the next 20 cycles in increasingly advanced theoretical studies, followed by carefully supervised practical experiences. Each step has been refined over thousands of generations to produce emperors who maintain our traditions and stability." She turned back to face them. "But perhaps tradition alone is insufficient for the challenges to come." Both Kelmar and Ethan remained silent, sensing the weight of her contemplation. "I am establishing a new educational directive," Shalara announced. "Prince Kelmar will continue his traditional studies as the foundation of his imperial education. But these will now be supplemented by a new program focusing on adaptive governance, cross-species diplomacy, and innovation methodologies. She focused on Ethan. You will help design this program, working with our royal educators. Your perspective as a human will be valued, but it will be balanced with Zentran requirements. Ethan bowed deeply. I'm honored, Your Luminescence. Don't be too honored yet, Shalara cautioned. The court will resist this change. Many will see it as contaminating the prince's education with foreign ideas. How will you respond to such concerns, Mother? Kelmar asked. Shalara's mouth parts shifted in the Zentran equivalent of a smile. I will point to the Dravex crisis. Results speak louder than tradition. In the months that followed, the new educational program took shape. As Shalara had predicted, there was resistance from the court. Traditional educators complained about human corruption of imperial values. Military leaders worried about teaching the future emperor weak conflict resolution methods. Resource ministers fretted over inefficient allocation models. Yet each time a crisis arose that traditional methods struggled to address, Kelmar and his growing team of cross-species advisors would find innovative solutions that preserved Zentran interests while avoiding unnecessary conflict or resource expenditure. One standard year after the Dravex crisis, Shalara stood in the Grand Council chamber, surrounded by representatives from all 7 systems of the Empire, including, for the first time, human representatives from Earth colonies. Before them all stood Prince Kelmar, no longer a child but an emerging leader, with Ethan Cole standing respectfully at his side. The Imperial Education Program has been revised, Shalara announced to the assembled dignitaries. While maintaining our core values and traditions, we recognize that the complexity of our expanding empire requires new approaches. Prince Kelmar's education now includes perspectives from all major species within our borders, ensuring that the future emperor understands the full diversity of his subjects. She gestured to Ethan. This human advisor has been instrumental in developing this new approach. His service demonstrates the value that each species brings to our collective strength. As applause filled the chamber, some enthusiastic, some merely polite, Shalara caught her son's eye. In that brief exchange, she saw both gratitude for her support and determination to prove worthy of it. He had grown so much in such a short time, developing a confidence and wisdom beyond his years. Later, in her private chambers, she reflected on how drastically her perspective had changed since that day she had returned from the council to find her son making paper airplanes with a human janitor. What had seemed like a breach of protocol and potential threat had become the catalyst for the most significant evolution in imperial education in thousands of cycles. A discreet chime announced a visitor, Ethan Cole, answering her summons. Your Luminescence, he said, bowing as he entered. Sit, she invited, indicating a chair positioned for conversation rather than formal audience. When he had settled, she studied him thoughtfully. When I first found you teaching my son, I assumed you had some scheme to improve your position or influence imperial policy. And now? Ethan asked. Now I understand that your motives were both simpler and more complex than I imagined, she said. You saw potential in my son, potential that our traditional methods weren't fully developing. Ethan nodded. Prince Kelmar has a remarkable mind. He absorbs new concepts quickly and makes connections that surprise even me. He'll be an exceptional emperor. Because of your influence, Shalara acknowledged. Because of his own abilities, Ethan countered. I just offered him different tools to express them. Shalara's antennae twitched with amusement. You've learned diplomatic speech well for a former maintenance worker. I've had excellent teachers, Ethan smiled. I have a new assignment for you, Shalara said, her tone becoming more formal. The success of Prince Kelmar's education has created interest in applying similar methods more broadly. I am establishing an Imperial Innovation Academy, with students drawn from all species within the Empire. Ethan straightened, his expression revealing his surprise. Your Luminescence? You will serve as its first director, Shalara continued. Your mandate will be to identify promising approaches from all member species and develop methods for sharing them across the Empire, while respecting our foundational values. For once, the humans seemed at a loss for words. I'm deeply honored, Your Luminescence. But are you certain? There will be significant resistance to placing a human in such a position. There is always resistance to change, Shalara said dismissively. But as you taught my son, adaptability is as important as stability. The Zindaran Empire has endured for thousands of cycles by knowing when to preserve tradition and when to embrace new ideas. She rose, signaling the end of the audience. 1 year ago, I returned from the Galactic Council to find my son making paper toys with a maintenance worker. I was horrified at what I perceived as contamination of his imperial education. Ethan rose as well, waiting for her to continue. Now I understand that what appeared to be trivial play was in fact the beginning of a new era for the Empire, Shalara concluded. Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources. As Ethan bowed and departed to begin his new duties, Shalara returned to the window, gazing out at the empire that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia. Change was coming, not through revolution or crisis, but through the simple act of a human sharing his perspective with a young prince. It had begun with paper airplanes and jazz music. Where would it lead? For the first time in her long reign, Empress Shalara faced the future not with certainty, but with curiosity. And somehow, that uncertainty felt right. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.